Coming up on Bloomberg Best, over the next hour, we'll take you through some of the biggest and best interviews recently covered by Bloomberg TV Canada. Stories that shape each week in business and matter to investors here in Canada and around the world. This year, all eyes have been on the Bank of Canada's Governor, Stephen Poloz. Investors focused like lasers on each rate announcement, wondering if the benchmark will go up or down. Gold prices have been on a dramatic decline since the U.S. presidential election. Downside pressure continues to dominate precious metals pricing as a whole, with gold prices moving to a 10-month low. Will the slump continue into 2017? And climate change. Trump says it's a Chinese hoax. Policymakers around the world disagree, meeting regularly, creating laws and policies to fight global warming. All this and more coming up in the next hour. This is Bloomberg Best on Bloomberg TV Canada. Hello, I'm Rudyard Griffiths. Welcome to Bloomberg Best. Every day on Bloomberg TV Canada, we tackle the issues and events that shape Canada's business landscape. Over the next hour, we're going to present you with a collection of our best interviews that go behind the headlines to what matters most to investors. We start with the most powerful banker in Canada. In an interview with Bloomberg TV Canada's Amanda Lang, Bank of Canada Governor Stephen Poloz gives his outlook for the Canadian economy and talks about what signs he's watching that could potentially signal a rate change. We also hear from David Dodge, the former Bank of Canada governor, about what he thinks is going to be needed to get rates moving.
Is it the role of your bank to signal confidence, to try to encourage businesses and consumers that things are not as bad and that we're on a stable course?
Well, I think it's not our job to blow sunshine at the market, but I think it is our job to help sort out things and to help find the true underlying narrative and help people understand it better so they can make a clearer decision for their business. No business is the same as another. They all have different things that they need to know. But when there's as many things moving at the same time, it is the central bank's role to help them sort it out. Well, at this point, it's very hard to tell. We know the infrastructure spending is barely getting into a starting point. It took several months to sign up all the agreements with the provinces. But in that case, that kind of spending is designed to boost the trend and growth rate of the economy. And so we're less concerned about the immediate stimulus, more interested in the longer term effects. And so if it takes a little longer to do it right, that's perfectly fine. The other thing that we are monitoring closely is how consumers are reacting to the increase in child care benefits. And those benefits you do see perhaps a sign in the early retail sales data, but it's not unambiguous at this stage. I think this week we'll get national accounts, which will help us understand that for the third quarter. But the fourth quarter, I think, will tell the tale.
For a while there, it seemed as though you were sort of calling on the federal government to do the fiscal part of the job. You had done what you could monetarily. It does, though, seem as though the door is open to more on the monetary front. Would it need to be severely weaker than where we are now to consider some of the other options at your disposal?
Well, we frame this in terms of the outlook for inflation. It's not about the economy being weak or other, but of course they're connected. So right now it looks to us like we can have inflation back at target, coming from below, around the middle of 2018. And that's a reasonable time frame over which to keep your inflation on target. And so it would require for us to have a significant departure in that outlook. Such as we had in the case when the oil price shock. It was very clear that we were going to underperform that target then, and we moved accordingly. That's the kind of a calculus which must go on. It goes on a continuous basis. It depends on the shocks to the economy. Well, we don't foresee them. We have to wait for them to happen.
One of them that has happened and looks to be with us for some time is that oil story, taking a big chunk out of the economy here. Yes. In terms of sort of trying to construct policy around that, if oil stays low for a long time, how does it change the thinking about what we need to do to get this economy whole again?
Well, most of us do think that oil would would remain in this sort of ballpark, I suppose a wide range ballpark, but much lower than we're used to in the past for the foreseeable future. And in that context, what it means is that the economy must adapt to that lower price, and we'll see much slower growth. In fact, we've seen negative growth for the time being, but afterwards a slower growth track for that part of the economy and a faster growth track in the remainder. And so what we're watching for is that rotation or the shift over, and there are many signs of it which are positive. It's not done. We modeled it and thought it would take 3 to 5 years for the entire process to happen. And we're into year 3, so we're at that stage where we're seeing some real effects. Most of the negatives appear to be behind us, except for the income adjustment. After this, it's the positives which should be much more dominant.
One of them, and it's one of the subjects of your speech today, is the services sector, which is growing relatively well, albeit it's a much smaller component of our economy, so much less important. Is that a part of the structural shift you're talking about, that we should think less about traditional industries and more about new ones?
Well, certainly what we think is we lost a lot of export capacity over the course of this cycle, not just at the time of the global financial crisis, but in the few years preceding it. And so that's put a hole in the economy, and the idea is, what would you fill that up with? Well, probably the companies that closed their doors during that period are not suddenly going to reopen them. It's not a Sleeping Beauty model of exporting. What is more likely is it's brand new companies in different parts of the economy do it. So we're looking at those growth numbers and where the firm creation is, where the employment opportunities are the strongest, and which exporters are growing the fastest. So for example, IT services. It's a big hot area. And so we're watching that very closely and talking to those companies so we have insight into it. And those are the kinds of things that are going to fill the hole.
David Dodge, your concern is that rates around the world are just on the basement level, and the only way to really get things moving is for everyone to work together as a team.
Right. Well, central banks around the world really have been carrying the full burden of propping up global economies now for quite a while. Well, that was totally appropriate back in 2008, 9, 10, 11. But what's happened since then is that governments have been withdrawing fiscal stimulus and have left central banks to carry the whole load at these essentially emergency low interest rates. And we know that at these emergency low interest rates, the financial markets don't function as well as they should. They don't allocate capital appropriately. And indeed, we're not even sure that after a period of time when everybody expects interest rates to be low forever and ever, because that's what central banks said they were doing, that low rates actually pull forward investment in time. We certainly know they tend to distort investment to lower productivity uses. And so I started to argue back in 2014 and more vociferously last year that really the right thing to do for central banks is to try raise rates in a measured fashion, but a totally predictable fashion, rather than being, quote, data dependent in their efforts. And I have argued that to get rates back up to something off the floor that kind of resembles a working overnight rate, that moving rates up 1/4 of a point every 6 months or 3/4 of a point a year in a organized fashion would be a great thing to do.
Up next, we'll hear from two CEOs on the future price of gold and base metals. This is Bloomberg Best.